The village of Ikemba, the royal seat of the Ogodoro kingdom, basked under the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun. A bright blue sky stretched endlessly above the round thatched roofs, while the giggles and screams of children filled the air like music. On the palace grounds, little boys and girls chased one another, pretending to be warriors and rebels. Dust flew beneath their feet as they acted out battles. In the center of the group was young Prince Zecora, the only son of Prince Ikena. He had a vibrant red sash tied proudly across his shoulder and brandished a carved wooden rod like a mighty sword. Today's game was a classic tale of villain versus hero. Of course, Prince Zecora played the hero. The others rotated through roles of bandits and villains. But soon Zecora's blows grew rougher, his swings harder. A boy dropped to the ground, crying. A girl limped away, holding her elbow. "Stand up," Zecora barked, raising his stick high. "A true hero never shows weakness." Silence followed. The children froze. They feared stopping the game. He was the prince. If they complained, their families could suffer the consequences. But Zecora didn't notice the fear. To him, it was still fun. He only wanted to win. He liked the rush of control. It reminded him of the way his father dominated palace meetings. Bold, commanding, unquestioned. Then a voice sharp as a blade sliced through the air. "Stop that!" Zecora froze. A girl stood near the boundary of the playground. She looked about his age, her braids tight, her feet dusty, and her small frame vibrating with boldness. "You're done playing," she said, her voice unwavering. "You're hurting people." Zecora stared. No one had ever talked to him that way, ever. The palace guards shifted uncomfortably. One tried to approach, but the girl raised a hand. "I'm not scared," she said, her eyes locked on Zecora. Slowly, the boy lowered his stick. Around him, the other children backed away. One wiped his tears in silence. Zecora's chest sank. He hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. He just got carried away. He looked at the girl again. She hadn't budged. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Adaura," she said, "daughter of Commander Tobena." That name made the guards stiffen. Commander Tobena was a decorated war hero of the Ogodoro kingdom, honored, fearless, and deeply respected. Zecora nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice now small. Adaura didn't smile. She turned and walked away. Zecora stood there motionless, his stick suddenly heavy in his hand. That night he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed again and again. "Stop hurting them. You're done playing." And for the first time in his young life, Prince Zecora felt a strange and unfamiliar weight settle on his chest. Shame, yeah, and something else he couldn't quite name, a longing to be better. Not for his father, not even for the throne, for her. Many moons passed after that day in the palace yard. Prince Zecora began to change. He no longer barked at the other children or forced his way into every game. He started reading, observing, thinking. He would search for Adaura during his walks through the village, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. She was usually busy, helping her mother, walking beside her father, the great commander, Tobena. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and she would offer a slight nod. That was enough for him. That simple gesture pushed him to be more than just the prince. He wanted to be brave, kind, and righteous, like her. But deep within the palace walls, shadows grew darker. Prince Ikena, Zecora's father, often sat behind closed doors with Chief Dyke, a wealthy man with sprawling lands, herds, and a reputation for secrets. The two would whisper over scrolls and maps, their faces locked in grim seriousness. Servants passing by would bow quickly and avert their eyes. One evening, Zecora wandered into the council chamber by mistake. There, he saw his father and Chief Dyke hunched over a large map of the kingdom. "Soon," Chief Dyke murmured, "you won't need to kneel to your brother. The crown will be yours." Zecora quietly stepped back, heart pounding. Something about the conversation felt wrong, like a cold gust in the middle of a sunny day. He didn't understand the full meaning, but he sensed danger in their voices. That night, a heavy silence blanketed the kingdom. The stars disappeared behind clouds. The wind stopped. Then came the chaos, screams, the crackle of fire, steel clashing with steel. Zikora woke to the sound of shouting and hurried footsteps. He rushed to his window and saw soldiers in black storming the royal quarters. Loyal palace guards were trying to hold them back, but they were falling, one after another. He dashed into the hallway shouting, "Uncle! Uncle!" No one answered. He found his mother huddled in fear with a few servants. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "Where is father?" Zikora asked, but before she could reply, a guard dragged him away. "Stay hidden, my prince," the guard whispered. Elsewhere in the palace, Commander Tabena stood guard outside the royal chamber, sword soaked in blood. He fought with every last breath to protect the king, but the enemies were many. He battled like a lion until a spear tore into his side, dropping him to the ground. "Obiajulu," he gasped. His son, Obiajulu, barely 16, rushed to his side. He had trained all his life for moments like this, but his hands trembled as he held his father. Commander Tabena took one last breath. "Take your sister. Save Adaura. Run. But father, promise me, Obiajulu." Tears rolled down the boy's face. "I promise." The commander's eyes shut. His hand went limp. Obiajulu didn't have time to grieve. He sprinted through smoke and falling embers, searching desperately. He found Adaura crouched behind a yam barn, face stained with soot and tears. She didn't ask questions when he grabbed her hand. "We have to go," he said. They raced into the forest, the darkness swallowing them. Behind them, the royal palace burned. The king, Zikora's uncle, had been slain, and in the aftermath, Prince Ikenna took the throne. His face was calm as he sat on the lion-shaped stool in the great hall. Chief Dyke stood beside him, smiling. "Let the new kingdom rise," Ikenna declared. But Prince Zikora watched from the shadows, trembling. He had seen the blood, heard the cries, witnessed death, and worst of all, he had seen his father smile through it all. Far away, the moon shone pale over the tall grass as Obiajulu and Adaura ran breathlessly. The sound of boots followed close behind, palace guards, once loyal, now hunting them like prey. Obiajulu gripped his sister's hand tighter. "Don't look back," he whispered. Adaura's body shook with grief. Her world had crumbled. Her father was gone, her mother missing, their home destroyed. And now they were being hunted like thieves. They reached the edge of Omumiri Forest, dense and full of secrets. "Rest here," Obiajulu said, guiding her to a tree. But then they heard dogs barking, closer now. Panic surged. Obiajulu knelt in front of his sister. "Adaura, you must hide. They're after me too." "No!" she cried, gripping his shirt. "I won't leave you." "You have to. If they find us together, they'll kill you. You're a girl. You have a chance." Tears streamed down her face. "What if I never see you again?" "You will," he whispered, touching her cheek. "Remember the bridge near the old tree by the river? Meet me there, first day of every month." She nodded slowly. He helped her crawl beneath a mound of dry leaves and branches. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Then he stood, grabbed a stick to mimic a weapon, and ran toward the barking. "I'm over here," he yelled into the night. The guards changed direction. Their footsteps thundered past. Adaura lay still, breath held, heart racing. She waited and waited. The hours crept by. Dawn broke. Birds began to sing. She crawled out, trembling. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with ash. Her legs barely moved. She stumbled until she collapsed, crawling through the forest, until a gentle old farmer found her. "My child," he gasped, rushing to lift her into his arms. "You're safe now." She had no strength to speak, no tears left to cry. The farmer whispered softly, "You're safe. No one will hurt you here." And when he later asked her name, she stared at the fire, afraid. "I don't know," she whispered. "Then I'll give you one," the man said kindly. "You'll be called Kioma, daughter of strength. It will remind you who you are." And so the noble girl Adora vanished from the world. In her place, Kioma was born. But every night before sleep, she whispered one name into the silence. Obiajulu, I'm still waiting. The palace felt like a tomb. Prince Zikora stood near the towering pillars of the royal hall, fists clenched, eyes wide. The regal carpet that once welcomed honored guests was now darkened by blood. His uncle, the rightful king, was gone. In his place sat Prince Ikena, Zikora's father, draped in royal blue, golden beads circling his neck, his hands resting on the lion-carved arms of the royal seat. But his face held no remorse, no grief, only power. Zikora wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand why, but his legs refused to move. At Ikena's side stood Chief Dyke, now adorned in ceremonial white. He scanned the room with a sly smile as if he had conquered it. Just days ago, these men had been whispering in secret. Now they ruled out in the open. Later that evening, Zikora approached his father's private chamber. The door stood ajar. Inside, King Ikena sat alone, sipping from a wooden cup filled with palm wine. "Father," Zikora said softly. The king looked up. "Zikora, come, sit." But Zikora didn't move. "You killed him," he whispered. "You killed your own brother." Ikena sighed and leaned back. "It had to be done." "No," Zikora's voice trembled. "You betrayed your blood, your people." The king stood, his tone steady and cold. "Someday you'll understand. Ruling requires sacrifice. We couldn't allow weakness to continue." Zikora's heart ached. "You don't even believe that." Ikena stepped forward. "You are my son, and now my heir." Zikora took a step back. "I never wanted this, but you were born for it," his father replied calmly. Zikora turned and left without another word. That night, Zikora's mother grew gravely ill. She coughed through the darkness, her body frail, her voice faint. He stayed beside her, clutching her hand. She gazed into his eyes and whispered, "Stay kind, my son. Don't become like them." He nodded through tears. By morning, she was gone. No questions were asked. No guards were punished. No healers summoned. They said it was the cold wind, but Zikora didn't believe it. The very next day, the palace erupted in drums and festivity. Red and white dancers filled the courtyard. The people gathered in celebration. Zikora was declared the crown prince. Cheers echoed and skies were clear, but his heart was empty. He stood beside his father, wearing a gold-beaded crown. They called him the future of Ogodoro, but inside everything felt hollow. The warmth of childhood, the joy of friendship, the fire of truth, all burned away. All that remained was a title, Crown Prince Zikora, and a heart full of sorrow. 15 years passed like smoke trailing behind a dying flame. The once vibrant palace of Ikemba had grown cold, stripped of the joy and laughter that once echoed through its marble halls. The royal drums had fallen silent. The music of celebration was long gone. Prince Zikora, now a man, moved through the corridors like a quiet shadow. His eyes held a distant emptiness. His voice, low and deliberate, only spoke when necessary. The servants tiptoed around him. Guards stiffened when he passed, not out of fear, but from the weight of his silent presence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't punish. He simply watched. The only time his expression changed was when he stood by the window of his chamber, looking out at the sky, always as though he was searching for someone. Someone who never came. In another wing of the palace lived Queen Moriniki, Ikena's second wife. She was stunning, cunning, and calculating. Her son, Prince Somto, was 10 years younger than Zikora, but Queen Moriniki was always whispering in the right ears. "Somto is more gracious," she would say. "Somto is loved by the people," she'd insist. "Somto should be crown prince," she declared again and again. King Ikena never opposed her directly. He would only nod with a faraway look in his eyes, like a man haunted by his past. But Queen Moriniki wasn't the only serpent in the palace. Chief Dyke had grown even more powerful over the years. His influence ran deep. His daughter, Ifunanya, had been named Crown Princess. She wore the most ornate wrappers, draped herself in gold bangles, and adorned her hair with coral beads. But her heart, it was filled with ambition, pride, and secrets. Zikora had never touched her, not once. She would come into his chambers, speaking with practiced sweetness, feigning affection. He would turn away. When she reached for his hand, he would walk out. Behind her smile was frustration. She knew what she was just a pawn to keep Chief Dyke's power tied to the throne. But Zikora's heart wasn't inside the palace. It was still far away, somewhere in a memory he carried like a fading scar. A voice that once scolded him, a pair of eyes that once stared him down. He still thought of Adora, though she'd likely perished in the coup. That thought never left him, and he never truly let go. Then the rain stopped. The sky hardened. The rivers ran dry. The yam fields cracked. Goats thinned. Children cried for water. In the kingdom's squares, the people murmured under the trees. They pointed fingers and whispered in fear. "It's the prince," some said. "He refuses to consummate his marriage," others muttered. "The gods are angry." At first, Zikora paid no mind. But the noise reached the palace. Whispers turned to complaints. And finally, one elder stood before the royal council and spoke boldly. "Until the crown prince becomes a true husband, this land shall suffer." Zikora said nothing. His eyes were downcast. His soul burned with silent pain. He could not love a woman he did not trust. He could not give himself to a throne soaked in betrayal. And he could not forget the one woman he had once hurt and never stopped remembering. But the kingdom was suffering. That night, he sat under the moon, fists clenched in frustration. And the next morning, his voice echoed through the palace like thunder. "In 30 days, he declared, every man and woman must marry. No one shall remain alone." The news hit like a shockwave. Markets buzzed. Drums beat in confusion. Families panicked. "What of the prince himself?" someone dared ask. "Will he now accept his wife?" Zikora gave no reply. He simply turned and walked away. Behind him, Queen Morinike smiled. Chief Dyke smirked. But far from the palace, in the quiet red dirt village of Obika, life continued at a slower pace. Mud homes, palm-roofed huts, and a modest market lined the village. Barefoot children laughed through narrow paths, and among them lived a young woman named Hyoma. No one there knew she had once been Adora, daughter of a fallen war hero. The old farmer who rescued her years ago had raised her with love and dignity. Though his back was now bent with age, his care for her never wavered. Hyoma had grown into a kind and stunning young woman, graceful, wise, humble. Many men had asked for her hand. She always said no. She never explained why, but on the first day of every month, she walked to the small wooden bridge beyond the farms and sat silently waiting. That bridge was a promise, a place her brother had told her to wait. She had waited 15 years, and still she hoped. Then one morning, the air in Obika shifted. A royal town crier appeared at the market square, staff in one hand, scroll in the other. He struck his gong and announced, "By royal decree of Crown Prince Zikora, all unmarried men and women must wed within 30 days. Disobedience shall be punished." Gasps spread. Some cheered, others wailed. Hyoma stood frozen. Her basket of palm fruits slipped from her hands. "What kind of prince would make such a law?" she asked aloud. "What does another's marriage have to do with him?" Elders whispered. Girls cried. Parents rushed to match their daughters with any man who would say yes. But Hyoma remained inside her hut, silent. She had never fallen in love, never even held a man's hand. And now, because of a man she had never met, she was being forced to pretend. "What does this prince know about love?" she muttered. "What does he know about pain?" That night, the old farmer sat beside her by the fire. "What will you do, my daughter?" She shook her head. "I don't know." He was quiet for a long while. Then gently he said, "Perhaps Perhaps you must lie. She turned to him in surprise. Tell them you're engaged, he said, to someone far away, a soldier. It may buy us time. But who? She whispered. Pick any name. She paused, then sighed. Kelechi, she said softly. She didn't know why that name came to her lips. It just did. That night, when the elders knocked to collect the names of the unmarried, Chioma stood tall. I'm engaged, she said. His name is Kelechi. He serves in the capital. The elders nodded. They moved on. Chioma shut the door, her heart racing. The deadline would soon arrive. And she had no idea that the name she'd chosen, the one she thought she'd invented, belonged to the very man she had once met in her childhood dreams. The palace corridors grew darker with each passing day. Though the drums still beat during festivals and the wine still flowed in gatherings, behind the golden walls of Ikemba, secrets coiled like snakes waiting to strike. In her room, Ifunanya, now crowned princess, sat pale and trembling. Her hands clutched her belly. Her eyes were rimmed with red. She had just discovered she was pregnant. But the child was not Prince Zikora's. It never could be. He had never so much as touched her. The father was Obinna, a palace guard, loyal, brave, and tragically foolish. He had been Zikora's closest friend, sworn protector, and now the root of a dangerous secret. When Ifunanya confessed the truth to her father, Chief Dyke's face turned stone cold. You fool, he roared. You carry a guard's child? I didn't plan this, she cried. I thought I could hide it. But then Chief Dyke paused, his anger folded into calculation. Slowly, a smile crept onto his face. Maybe this isn't a curse, he said. Maybe it's a gift. Ifunanya stared at him, confused. What do you mean? If Zikora were to disappear, he said quietly, this child could be declared heir. No one would question royal blood. Her eyes widened. You're not suggesting? Let me think, he interrupted, already pacing. Days later, King Ikena summoned his son. You will journey to the Temple of Rain, he said. The skies are dry. The people are angry. Go and pray for the land. Zikora nodded. He did not argue. He welcomed the quiet, the isolation, anything that took him away from the palace's poisoned air. He left with a small escort, including his trusted companion, Obinna. The journey began in silence. The forest rustled. The wind whispered through trees. Then, suddenly, an arrow zipped past Zikora's head. Then another. Ambush! Someone screamed. More arrows flew. Blades shimmered in the forest light. Shadows darted between the trees. Assassins. Zikora ducked behind a tree, heart thudding. Who are they? Paul, he shouted. Obinna grabbed him, eyes wide. It's Dyke, I think. He sent them. Zikora turned, stunned. Why? Obinna hesitated, then whispered, because the child is mine. Time stopped. Zikora stared in disbelief. His best friend, his protector. The one person he trusted. I didn't mean for this, Obinna said quickly. I never wanted it to happen. The woods erupted with screams. Steel clanged. Men fell. Obinna took Zikora by the shoulders. We don't have time. Listen to me. Zikora was frozen. Take off your robe, Obinna urged. What? They're after you, not me. If I wear the royal colors, they'll think I'm you. You'll escape. No. Zikora, please, let me fix this. More arrows, louder footsteps. Obinna yanked off his own tunic and tossed it to the ground. He wrapped himself in Zikora's red and gold cloak, tied it tight, and gave a pained smile. Run, my prince, he whispered. Run far. Then he turned and shouted into the woods. I am Crown Prince Zikora. The attackers surged toward him. Zikora ran. He didn't look back, but just before disappearing into the thick forest, he heard the sickening whistle of an arrow. Then a scream. Then silence. Zikora turned in time to see Obinna's body fall, a spear in his chest, cloak fluttering around him. The assassins vanished into the trees. Zikora stumbled deeper into the forest, blood soaking his side, breath ragged, limbs shaking. Then, crack, his head slammed against a low branch, and darkness swallowed him whole. No longer a prince, no longer a man with a name, just a broken soul lying motionless beneath the trees, bleeding, forgotten, and stripped of memory. By evening, the forest was quiet again. Only the birds whispered. The wind returned gently, rustling the leaves like a lullaby. Down a narrow path, Kioma made her way through the trees, her hands clutching a small basket. She had come to gather herbs for her adoptive father, the village healer. A woman had just given birth, and they needed bark and bitterleaf. She walked this route often. The forest was familiar. But today, something felt different. The birds were unusually still. The breeze paused. Then just ahead, she froze. A body lay sprawled beneath a tree, face down, still. Kioma stepped back, fear gripping her. But slowly, curiosity pulled her forward. She crouched beside the man. He was young, tall, covered in dirt and blood. His arm was twisted awkwardly, his side soaked in red. "Hello?" she whispered. No response. Gently, she turned him over. His face, though bruised, looked peaceful. His breathing was faint, but it was there. He was alive. With all her strength, she dragged him onto a bamboo mat and hoisted it across her back. The weight nearly crushed her, but she kept going. By the time she reached the compound, she was breathless. "Papa!" she called out. Her adoptive father, the kind old healer, rushed to her side. "What happened?" "I found him. In the forest," she gasped. "He was alone." The healer examined him quickly, then called for warm water. Together they cleaned his wounds, bound his side with herbs, and forced warm broth down his throat. 2 days passed. On the third morning, Kioma sat beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, when his eyelids fluttered open. Slowly, he looked around, disoriented, confused. "You're safe," she said gently. "We found you." He stared blankly at her. Who am I?" She blinked. "You don't remember?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know anything." The healer stepped into the hut. "Do you remember your name?" The man closed his eyes, struggled, then looked up. "No." The old man offered a quiet smile. "Then we'll give you one." He turned to Kioma, then back to the stranger. "We'll call you Kalechi. It means God's will. Perhaps your being here is no accident." That evening, Kioma and her father sat under the mango tree. The old man's tone was serious. "The prince's decree still holds. Unmarried women will face punishment." Kioma nodded quietly. The healer looked toward the small hut where Kalechi now lay sleeping. "He has no memory, no family, but he's here. Maybe this is the only way to keep you safe." Kioma turned to him, startled. "You want me to say, he's my fiancé?" The old man nodded. "You don't have to love him," he said gently. "Just pretend. Until this storm passes." She didn't answer right away. But eventually she nodded. "All right, I will." The very next morning, the village elders returned to confirm the marital status of all unmarried women. Kioma stood firm at her doorstep. "I told you before," she said. "I'm engaged, and now he has returned." They looked at the stranger beside her, still weak, leaning slightly on the doorframe, trying to smile. The elders accepted her word. They moved on. That evening, under a fading orange sky with only 3 witnesses and no ceremony, Kioma and Kalechi were married. No drums, no fanfare, just a quiet fire, a soft murmur of prayers. 2 strangers, bound together by lies meant for protection, and a destiny neither of them yet understood. Far away, back in Ikemba Palace, silence hung like smoke in the air. The royal guards stood like statues. The palace maids moved like shadows. No one dared to speak above a whisper. The crown prince was dead. King Akena sat in his chamber, a broken man, His crown sat untouched beside him. His fingers trembled around his staff. "They found a body," his advisor said, "by the riverbank." The king looked up slowly. "And the face?" "Unrecognizable," the man replied. "Wolves got there first, but he wore the prince's robe." King Ikena nodded numbly. "Enough." The words choked in his throat. His chest rose and fell. He closed his eyes, but the tears came anyway. Not far away, Chief Dyke stood before the council beside Ifunanya. His tone was calm, controlled. "My daughter is carrying the blood of the royal line," he said. "The prince may be gone, but his child lives. This child should be heir." Some elders nodded. Others remained silent. Ifunanya placed her hand protectively on her belly, but inside her heart beat with fear. She knew the truth. Later that evening, Queen Morinike entered the king's chamber dressed in deep black, head covered. Her voice was soft, calculated. "My king, I grieve with you," she said, kneeling. "But the kingdom must look forward. My son, Prince Somto, is ready." King Ikena didn't answer. She leaned in closer. "If the people fight over the throne, will that honor Zikora's memory?" Still, the king said nothing. But later that night, as the moon cast long shadows in the courtyard, he made a decision. "No heir shall be named," he declared. "Not yet. Let the land mourn for 40 days. No more, no less." And so the kingdom waited, holding its breath. But in Obik, a village far removed from palace politics, no one suspected that the man known only as Kelechi was the very prince the kingdom believed dead. Not even Kioma. Not yet. In the humble village of Obiko, curious eyes followed Kioma everywhere. She had always been admired, gentle, hardworking, graceful. Every mother had once hoped she'd marry their son. So when news spread that she had secretly married a man no one knew, the whispers began like wildfire. Then they saw him, Kelechi. He walked like someone unfamiliar with village life. He held a hoe like it was a spear. He couldn't start a cooking fire or carry a basket properly. And worst of all, he smiled too much. "Is he all right?" one woman whispered. "Kioma, of all men?" "This one," another sneered. Children giggled behind his back. Grown men shook their heads as he passed. But Kelechi didn't seem to mind. He tried every single day. He rose early to fetch water, helped in the kitchen, and carried wood, though he often got blisters. And when he failed, he would chuckle and say, "Next time, I'll get it right." At first, Kioma kept her distance, watching quietly, unsure what to make of the man fate had thrown at her. But slowly, her guard began to lower. One day, an old man came asking for help with a broken stool. Kelechi examined it, took a knife, and, without a word, carved and reshaped the wood until it looked brand new. "Who taught you this?" the old man asked. Kelechi shrugged. "I don't know." Another day, a group of boys sat beneath the mango tree, struggling with their alphabets. Kelechi knelt beside them, drew patterns in the sand, and explained things in a way even the village teacher admired. That was the first time the villagers began to take him seriously. Chioma watched him closer now. She saw how he helped elders cross streams, how he played with toddlers, how he taught the orphan boy down the road how to read and write. Most in the village couldn't even read their own names, but Kelechi taught like someone who had done it all his life. And at night he would stare at the sky quietly, lost in thoughts he couldn't explain. No, still, he remembered nothing. One evening as they walked together by the river, something that had slowly become their habit, Kioma finally asked him, "Why don't you ever ask about your past?" He smiled. "Because I'm here now, with you. Maybe that's enough." She looked away. "But don't you want to remember?" "Sometimes," he said. "But if remembering means leaving this, I'm not sure I want to." Her heart fluttered. He reached out gently. "May I?" he asked before taking her hand. She nodded. He held it, warm, protective, sincere. "I don't know who I was," he said, locking eyes with her. "But I know how I feel. when I look at you." Kioma's breath caught in her throat. He leaned in. She did too. Their lips met, softly, tenderly, like a new promise forming. Then, thunder. The sky cracked open, and after months of silence, the rains finally came. Heavy, cleansing, beautiful. Kioma laughed, tilting her face to the sky. Kelechi pulled her closer, shielding her from the downpour with his arms. Villagers rushed outside, dancing and singing under the rain. Some stopped in awe, watching the two soaked figures standing at the riverbank like something out of a forgotten tale. That day, no one called Kelechi strange. They called him a blessing. From that moment, the land began to breathe again. Crops revived, trees bloomed, children laughed with full bellies. And when the people of Obike spoke of the blessing, their eyes often turned to Kioma and her strange husband, who now seemed not so strange at all. In the quiet courtyard behind their hut, Kioma's adoptive father watched them closely. He was old now, his joints ached, and his steps were slow, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He noticed how Kelechi looked at Kioma when she wasn't watching, how she laughed freely again, the way she had as a child, how they moved in perfect rhythm without needing many words. One lazy afternoon, as the sun painted gold across the yard, the old man sat sipping palm wine. Kioma was peeling cassava nearby. Kelechi was fixing a loose gate hinge. The old man smiled quietly to himself. "She's happy," he thought. "My daughter is finally happy." He glanced at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are, for bringing this man into her life." But that night, the peace broke. Kelechi tossed and turned on his raffia mat, his chest slick with sweat. He mumbled in his sleep, his fist clenched. He was dreaming, but not of Kioma's smile. He saw fire, screams, blood, a young boy holding a wooden stick, a girl's voice shouting, "Stop hurting them," a deep voice echoing, "This is for the greater good." Then, darkness. He jolted upright, panting. Kioma was already by the door, holding a clay lamp, her eyes filled with concern. "Another bad dream?" she asked gently. He nodded, wiping his face. "Do you remember anything?" He stared at the wall, struggling. "Only flashes," he whispered. "A little boy, a girl with fire in her eyes, and betrayal. Something terrible." Kioma sat beside him and took his hand. "You don't have to rush. It will come when it's meant to." He looked at her, heart full. "And if I remember someone else?" he asked softly. "Someone I loved. Someone I'm married to already?" Her voice didn't shake. "Then I'll be happy for you, even if it means losing you, even if it breaks me." He didn't answer. Instead, he held her hand tighter. Days passed. The routine returned, until one moment changed everything. Kioma was humming softly beside the kitchen one afternoon, peeling yams, a song, a lullaby, one her real father had taught her, a melody of strength, sung to her when she was little. Kelechi, walking nearby with firewood, froze. The sound pierced something deep inside him. He dropped the wood. "What song is that?" he asked, stepping closer. She paused. "Just an old lullaby, from my childhood, my father's." Kelechi swallowed hard. His head ached. That tune, it was in his dreams. He had heard it before, not just in sleep, in memory. His hands trembled. He looked at her, then up at the sky. Something inside him was waking, slowly but surely. He turned and walked away silently, his thoughts in turmoil. Kioma watched him go, confused. She didn't understand what had just happened, but she felt it too. Something had shifted. And neither of them knew it yet, but the past had just knocked softly at their door. Life in Obik resumed its quiet rhythm. The scent of firewood floated in the breeze. Children's laughter echoed down the narrow paths. But within Kelechi, everything had changed. He worked harder than ever, pouring his energy into the village. He helped rebuild the school's broken fence, carved tools for farmers, and fixed the shrine bell that hadn't rung in years. Yet it wasn't just his hands that impressed the villagers. It was the way he thought. He always found a simpler way to solve problems. A safer route through the bush. A faster method for drying cassava. Even the village chief began consulting him for advice. And Kioma watched him closely. She noticed the way he stood tall when addressing elders, the quiet confidence in his voice, the way he never sought praise, but always offered help. And with every passing day, the question grew louder in her heart. Who are you really? She whispered it one night as she stirred a pot of soup. Kelechi only smiled and changed the subject. That evening, Kioma went into the forest to gather herbs. Her father had a patient suffering from fever, and they were low on bark and leaves. She told Kelechi she'd be back before sunset. But as the sky darkened, she didn't return. Kelechi waited, first standing, then pacing, then calling out into the night. When the moon rose and she was still gone, panic seized his chest. He grabbed a torch and sprinted into the forest. Not far away, Kioma was struggling. 3 masked men had grabbed her near the narrow path. Their hands were rough. One covered her mouth, another bound her arms. Pretty girl like you shouldn't walk alone, one sneered. She kicked, bit, screamed, but she was alone. Just as one of the men raised a hand to strike her, a voice boomed through the trees. Let her go. They turned. Kelechi stood at the edge of the clearing, his face illuminated by firelight, his jaw tight. Without hesitation, he charged. The first man lunged with a blade. Kelechi disarmed him in one fluid move. The second swung a knife. Kelechi dodged, blocked, and struck with precision. His movements were fast, skilled, trained. Kioma, still tied, watched in awe. She had never seen him like this. Then one of the attackers swung a sword at Kelechi's head. It connected. Kelechi stumbled back, gripping his skull. And suddenly, it all came rushing in. The throne room, fire and betrayal, his mother's pale hands, the girl who had stood up to him, the coup, Chinedu's voice whispering, Run, my prince. The assassination, the fall, he remembered. His name wasn't Kelechi. He was Zikora, crown prince of Ogodoro, but he didn't stop fighting. He lunged forward with renewed strength. One attacker flew into a tree, another hit the ground hard. The last dropped his weapon and fled into the night. Kelechi, Zikora, rushed to Kioma, hands shaking. He untied her carefully. Are you all right? He asked, breathing hard. I should ask you, she replied. You fought like someone trained in a palace. He didn't respond. He helped her to her feet. She leaned into him as they walked back through the woods in silence. That night, Kioma collapsed from exhaustion. But Zikora couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, eyes wide, heart thundering. He remembered everything. His father, his betrayal, the fall of the kingdom, and the girl, Kioma, who had once scolded a prince on a playground. Now he knew who he was. But more terrifying, he knew who she was. And with that truth came a heavier question. What would happen when she found out? And worse, what would happen when he had to leave? In the days that followed the attack, everything in Obik seemed unchanged, but Zikora felt like a stranger in his own skin. He continued to fetch water, fix fences, and carry baskets to market, pretending nothing had happened. Yet deep inside, everything had shifted. The weight of his true identity pressed against his chest like a stone. He was no longer lost. He had found his name, his past, his purpose. But he had also found Kioma, and now he was torn between duty and love. He studied her in a new light, not because he doubted her, but because he now saw her fully. The quiet resilience, the courage in her voice, the way she never pitied herself despite all she'd endured. One evening, as they prepared soup by the fire, Kioma hummed that same haunting lullaby again, the one that had unlocked his memory. Zikora froze, staring at her. That voice. That tune. She was the girl. The girl from his childhood. The girl who had shouted, "You're hurting people." The girl who changed him before he even understood what change meant. He said nothing, but the world felt like it had spun full circle. Fate had brought him back to her, not as a prince, not as royalty, but as a nameless man. And she had loved him anyway. Not for his title, but for his heart. Later that night, they sat under the stars watching fireflies dance in the dark. Kioma spoke softly. "My real father, he served in the royal army," she said. "He was a general before he died in the palace uprising." Zikora's breath caught. She continued, unaware of his reaction. "They said he was a traitor, but I never believed it. I still don't." He turned away, eyes burning. Her voice, her story, her strength. It was all true. She was Adora, the girl who once stood up to him with fire in her eyes. He swallowed the truth, unsure how to speak it aloud. She had saved him, nurtured him, protected him, loved him. And all the while, she didn't know that the man she called Kalechi was the very prince who changed her life, and whose betrayal had once destroyed hers. He could barely breathe, but he said nothing. The next few days, he refused to leave her side. He followed her to the stream, helped her cook, and carved her name into a small wooden pendant. When she laughed, he laughed with her. When she was silent, he sat beside her in silence. Their bond deepened. Their love grew roots. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, they stood by the riverbank again. Kioma folded her arms gently. Her braids swayed in the breeze. Zikora took a breath. "Kioma," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Yes?" "I don't remember everything," he began carefully. "But there's one thing I know for certain now." She tilted her head, curious. "What's that?" He stepped closer. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Whatever happens, I'll always protect you." Her eyes shimmered. She nodded, her voice steady. "Me too. Always." They stood hand in hand, watching the river move slowly beside them. And in that moment, the boy who once sat on a blood-stained throne felt more like a king than he ever had in the palace. Every month, on the first day, Kioma rose before dawn. She would pass the yam farms, walk beyond the towering trees, and follow the narrow path to the old wooden bridge just outside Obik. There she would sit silently, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the flowing river below. It was more than a routine. It was a promise. A vow she had made 15 years ago to her brother, Obiajulu. "Meet me here, first day of every month." She had waited, through rain, through heat, through years of silence. Even when her legs ached, even when her hope thinned like morning mist, she never missed a single visit. And each time she returned with a soft smile and told Kalechi, "It's something I just have to do." But far away in a marketplace thick with dust and shouting traders, a man with a scar across his chest paused mid-step. He heard something, just a whisper, a name. "Kioma. She lives in Obik, took in a strange man from the forest. They say he's not well, but she cares for him." The man froze. His heart slammed in his chest. Kioma? Could it be her? That name, that kindness, that strength. It had to be. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He simply packed his things at dawn the next morning and began walking, his bow slung across his back, boots worn from years of exile. It was Obiajulu, scarred, weathered, a man forged in pain, shaped by survival. He traveled for days, cutting through paths only a trained fighter would know. His heart beat faster the closer he got. And on the first day of the new month, he reached the bridge. There she was, sitting with her head bowed, the wind brushing strands of hair across her face. He stood still at the edge of the clearing, unable to speak. Then softly on, "Adora?" She turned sharply, her breath caught. She rose to her feet, hands trembling. The basket she carried dropped to the ground. "Obiajulu?" she whispered. He nodded. Tears filled his eyes before they even reached his cheeks. She ran into his arms, and they clung to each other like people holding onto a memory that had almost slipped away. "I waited," she sobbed. "I never stopped waiting." "And I never stopped searching," he whispered into her hair. They stood like that, rocking gently, the river beneath them flowing like the years that had passed, lost but never forgotten. From the shadows among the trees, Zikora watched. He said nothing. He didn't step forward. He simply watched them, two siblings reunited after a lifetime of distance. His eyes were full, but his face was calm. This was the moment she had waited for. 15 years of hope wrapped into one embrace. And watching it unfold, he knew. It was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to reclaim his truth. Time to face the past so he could decide the future. The journey back from the bridge felt surreal. Kioma walked beside her brother, one hand gripping her basket, the other wrapped tightly around Obiajulu's arm. She kept glancing up at him, half afraid he'd disappear again. His face had changed, older, darker from sun and battle, a deep scar cut across his jaw, but the warmth in his eyes was the same, still her brother, still her protector. As they passed the old Irako tree and crossed the narrow stream into their family compound, Kioma called out joyfully, "Papa, come quickly! There's someone I want you to meet." Her adoptive father stepped out slowly, leaning on his cane, his eyes locked on the tall figure standing beside Kioma. "This is him," she said through happy tears. "My brother, Obiajulu." The old man blinked, then smiled gently. "Welcome home, my son," he said, voice thick with emotion. "The one who was lost has returned." Obiajulu bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir, for raising her, for protecting her when I could not. You have given her more than I ever could." That night they sat around the fire, sipping warm soup and sharing moments of silence filled with meaning. Then Kioma looked at her brother. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" she asked gently. Obiajulu stared into the flames. "When I left you in the forest that night," he said, voice low, "I ran as fast as I could. But they found me. Palace guards. They locked me away in a remote outpost. I was just a boy, but they feared my name." Kioma covered her mouth in shock. "I stayed there for years," he continued. "Then one night I escaped. I crossed rivers, forests. I joined a resistance group. We fought to protect those the crown ignored." His voice trembled. "Every time I saved a girl from danger, I thought of you. I didn't know if you were alive. I didn't know where to look." Kioma leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." They sat in silence, the fire crackling gently beside them. Then Kioma stood. "There's someone I want you to meet." She turned toward the small hut where Kelechi usually sat in the evenings, either sharpening sticks or reading to the neighbors' children. But the room was empty. She checked the backyard. No sign of him. "He said he was going to the market earlier," she murmured. "He should be back by now." The sun had dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the compound. Crickets chirped in the distance. Kioma stepped outside the gate and looked down the road. Nothing. Only wind and whispers. She waited and waited. But Kelechi, Zikora, did not return. Not by dusk. Not even by moonrise. And deep in her heart, something began to stir. A quiet fear. Back in the great palace of Ikemba, silence ruled. But it was the dangerous kind. Servants whispered. Guards glanced over their shoulders. Even the courtyards, once filled with drummers and dancers, now felt hollow. Something dark loomed over the royal court. Every day, Queen Moriniki paid quiet visits to King Ikena's chambers. She walked in gracefully, bowed with care, and spoke in hushed tones. "My king," she said yet again, "it has been months. The people are starting to talk." King Ikena remained motionless, staring at the carved lions on the arms of his stool. You are not getting any younger, she continued. If anything happens to you, who will rule? Who will protect the kingdom? The king closed his eyes. She leaned in, her voice like honey with a bitter edge. Will you let Zikora's memory cause the clans to fight over power? Ikena's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. That same day, Chief Dyke entered the council hall. Dressed in his finest robes, he bowed before the king, smiling politely. My king, he began, my daughter Ifunanya still mourns, but she carries the child of the late crown prince. The bloodline must be preserved. King Ikena remained still. This child should be protected, Dyke continued, named heir, before enemies of this kingdom rise from the shadows. The king's face twitched ever so slightly. He didn't believe the child was Zikora's. Not truly. But grief had made him weak. Guilt had made him silent. And the palace was full of hands reaching for power. That night, the king sat alone in the throne room. No guards, no servants, only shadows and memories. He stared at the engraved name of his son on the wall. Where are you, my son? He whispered. Why does it feel like you're still out there? Why haven't you come back? The silence didn't answer. But the next morning, the king addressed the royal court. His voice was slow, strained, but firm. After much reflection, he said, I have decided to name a new crown prince. The air in the hall froze. Queen Moriniki straightened, eyes glittering. Chief Dyke leaned forward. Prince Somto, the king declared, will be crowned heir to the throne of Ogudoro in 3 weeks. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Drums thundered in the palace square. The kingdom rejoiced, for a new heir had been named. But far from the marble halls and golden robes, in a small village with dusty roads and humble huts, the true prince was watching everything change. And this time he wouldn't stay silent. Zikora had seen his sister reunited with her brother. He had seen the love she had for family, for truth. And now he had one last thing to do. Reclaim what was his, not out of pride, but out of purpose. The throne could not fall into the wrong hands. Not again. The morning of the coronation arrived in a wave of color and music. Inside the palace walls, trumpets blared. Drums pounded through the air. Dancers in red and gold moved rhythmically across the courtyard. Nobles arrived in finely woven wrappers. Servants lined the hallways, heads bowed. This was the day the kingdom would crown Prince Somto, the new heir of Ogudoro. At the center of it all sat King Ikena, dressed in solemn majesty, his face a mask of control. To his left, Queen Moriniki beamed in glittering gold. Beside her, young Prince Somto stood tall, adorned in coral beads and confidence. The royal council formed a circle around them. Chiefs and elders murmured blessings. Some whispered doubts. But no one dared speak aloud. Chief Dyke sat at the edge of the gathering, his posture straight, his eyes cold. At his side, Ifunanya rested a protective hand over her growing belly, her expression unreadable. As the high priest stepped forward to begin the ritual, the grand palace doors creaked open. The drums fell silent. All heads turned. There at the threshold stood a man in a plain brown wrapper, dust-covered feet and tired eyes, but eyes that knew these walls. Zikora, alive! The guards froze. The council gasped. King Ikena rose to his feet, his lips trembling. Zikora, he whispered. Zikora stepped into the hall slowly, each stride echoing, each moment heavier than the last. Yes, father, he said. It's me. Gasps filled the chamber. The high priest dropped his staff. Queen Moriniki's smile vanished. Zikora bowed before the king, then turned to the crowd. I did not die, he said clearly. I was betrayed. He reached into his wrapper and pulled out a folded parchment. This letter was written by Obina, the guard who gave his life to protect me. He knew of the plot. He disguised himself in my robes. He died in my place. He turned to Chief Dyke, locking eyes with him. Chief Dyke and his daughter Ifunanya planned my assassination, and the child she carries is not mine. A cry rose from the council. Murmurs broke into chaos. I have spoken to 2 former guards who survived the ambush. They witnessed it. They heard the orders. 2 older men stepped forward from behind the curtain. They bowed deeply. We were there, one said. We were paid to keep quiet, but not anymore. King Ikenna turned slowly to Chief Dyke. Is this true? Dyke stood, his lips trembling. Lies. All of it. Zecora took a step forward. Then why did you send assassins after me? Chief Dyke opened his mouth. No words came out. Ifunanya stood shakily. I didn't know they would kill him, she whispered. I thought it was just a warning. Guards, the king roared. Seize them both. Armored men swept forward. Chief Dyke struggled, shouting, You need me. I built this court. I held this kingdom together. Ifunanya collapsed to her knees, sobbing. A sharp cry rang from Queen Moroniki's corner. She had fainted. As servants rushed to lift her, King Ikenna stepped down from the stool and pulled Zecora into a trembling embrace. I thought I lost you, he whispered. I'm here now, Zecora murmured, and I won't run again. Silence wrapped the chamber, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. The true prince had returned, and nothing in Ogodoro would ever be the same again. The very next morning, a royal messenger, flanked by 2 guards, rode swiftly through the dirt paths of Obik. The golden crest on his scroll bore a single name, Kioma. At her modest compound, she was still in disbelief. The night before had been filled with silence. Kelechi hadn't returned. Her thoughts had spun in every direction. Fear, confusion, heartbreak. Now, as she stood beside Obiajulu and their adoptive father, 2 royal guards bowed before her. The king requests your presence, the messenger announced. Why? She asked softly. But they didn't answer. Moments later, she and Obiajulu were led through the palace gates. Everything felt larger, colder, sharper than she remembered. Marble columns, golden floors, velvet curtains. This was a world far from the simple fires and clay pots of Obik. People whispered as she passed. She's the one? Is it true? She brought him back. Then at the end of the grand hall, she saw him, Kelechi. Only, he wasn't wearing a wrapper anymore. He stood tall in red silk robes, a gold crown upon his head, his stance powerful, yet his eyes full of longing. He wasn't Kelechi. He was Prince Zecora, the man she had loved, the man she had married, and he had lied. Kioma's heart stilled. Zecora stepped down from the dais. Kioma, he said softly. She shook her head, tears welling. You lied to me. He stepped closer. Not at first. I truly didn't remember who I was. But when you did, she whispered, why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid you'd think I used you. Didn't you? Her voice cracked. He stepped forward again, voice trembling. I remembered my name, but I never forgot you. You're not just Kioma. You're Edaora, the girl who made a prince question his pride. The girl who waited by the bridge every month. The girl who saved a man with no name and gave him a reason to live. She looked away, breath shaking. He reached for her hand gently. I knew who you were before I remembered who I was, and I never stopped loving you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't fall in love with a prince, she said. I fell in love with a man who carried firewood and smiled like a fool. Zecora smiled gently. Then let me be him. Still. Just for you. She looked into his eyes she knew, eyes she trusted, and without another word, she stepped forward and laid her head softly on his chest. For a moment, there were no crowns, no palace, no whispers. Just 2 hearts that had finally found their way back to each other. The palace basked in a strange new light, joyful yet tense. For a short while, Kioma remained in the palace. She strolled through flowered courtyards with Zecora, laughed softly in marble gardens, and dined among nobles who stared with curious eyes. They looked like royalty, but it didn't feel like home. The walls were too polished, the voices too cautious, the eyes too watchful. Even when she walked hand in hand with the prince she had once known as Kelechi, Kioma felt like a stranger dressed in gold. One moonlit night, as they sat under a stone archway, watching stars scatter across the sky, she spoke gently. "I love you, Zikora, but I don't belong here." He turned to her quickly. "Don't say that." "I must," she whispered. "This place, it's not me." He frowned. "You're my queen." She shook her head. "I'm your heart, maybe, but not their queen. Not in this world of counsels and daggers behind smiles. I want freedom, not fear." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm not leaving because I don't love you," she said, voice breaking. "I'm leaving because I do, and I need to breathe." He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand." The next morning, Kioma returned to Obik with Obiejulu at her side. The villagers welcomed her with open arms, confused but joyful. Back in the palace, Zikora watched her ride away. His heart beat heavy, but he had work to do. And the palace had become more dangerous than ever. King Ikena's health was fading fast. His cough grew deeper, his steps more unsteady. Royal healers claimed it was age, but some believed it was sorrow, guilt weighing down his bones after years of betrayal and silence. With the king's strength fading, the vultures circled once more. Queen Morinike knew time was running out. If Ikena died and Zikora claimed the throne, her son Somto would be forgotten. She would be forgotten. One night she summoned Somto to her private chamber. Her voice was quiet, her hands cold. "If we don't act now," she whispered, "we lose everything." He hesitated. "Mother." "There's still a way," she insisted. And they made a dark decision. 2 days later, Zikora was invited to dine privately with Queen Morinike and Prince Somto. The food was served with smiles and sweet words, but hidden within his drink was poison. What they didn't know was that a maid, one who had once lived in Obik, had seen the powder being mixed. She remembered Kioma's kindness, Kelechi's laughter. She couldn't stay silent. She ran. "They're trying to kill the prince!" Guards stormed the chamber, just as Zikora raised the cup to his lips. Queen Morinike went pale. Somto stood abruptly, stunned. The drink was tested. The cup turned a deep shade of purple. Poison confirmed. The court was silent the next day as the truth was brought before the king. Despite his weakness, King Ikena sat upright on the royal stool, tears glistening in his tired eyes. "I gave you everything," he whispered to Morinike, "and this is how you repay me?" She wept. "I did it for my son." Prince Somto stood frozen. He said nothing. The king's voice was clear and heavy. "Let it be known, Prince Somto shall be exiled to the eastern province. He will live, but stripped of all titles. Queen Morinike," he continued, "shall be sent to the temple of Uloma, to live in solitude and prayer for the rest of her days. She will never again enter this palace." No one dared to speak. Zikora knelt before his father. "I will protect this kingdom," he said, "no matter the cost." But inside, his heart ached for only one thing, Chioma's smile. The drums rolled across the hills of Ogudoro. From every province, messengers were sent. Banners waved high above rooftops. The entire kingdom buzzed with excitement. After years of loss, betrayal, and uncertainty, Prince Zikarata, lost son, the rightful heir, was to be crowned king. The great lion's stool was dusted and polished. The royal staff of ancestors was removed from its shrine and placed under guard. Villagers in gold, white, and crimson poured into the capital for the grand event. Women braided their hair in elaborate coils. Boys painted tribal symbols on their faces. Elders danced slowly beneath the rising sun. But even in the heart of celebration, Zikora felt hollow. He stood in his chamber, dressed in the ceremonial robe of the kings before him. Fine coral beads circled his neck. A lion medallion rested on his chest. Yet when he looked into the mirror, he didn't see royalty. He saw a boy who once held a wooden stick and tried to act brave. He saw a man who loved a woman that didn't want to wear a crown. The ceremony began in the great courtyard. Chiefs sang ancient songs. The high priest recited the oaths of power. Drummers beat rhythms passed down for generations. King Akenna, now too weak to walk unaided, sat beneath a canopy, watching with misty eyes. As the priest called Zikora forward, the people rose to their feet in reverence. The lion staff was placed in Zikora's hands. He knelt. The crown, heavy with tradition and stone, was placed upon his head. From this day, the high priest declared, you shall be known as His Majesty, King Zikora I, ruler of Ogodoro, defender of the people, guardian of the ancients. The crowd erupted, praise songs, praise chants, praise tears. But Zikora's heart beat quietly. Even as the people shouted his name, his eyes searched the horizon beyond the walls. He longed for one face among the thousands. But she wasn't there. That night, while the palace danced and roasted goats and spilled palm wine in celebration, Zikora slipped away to the royal garden. He walked alone among the moonflowers, far from the lights and music. There he sat beneath a tree, just as he once had when he first began to question the throne. From his robe he pulled out a small wooden pendant, carved long ago in obeek, bearing one name, Kioma. He held it tight. She chose a life without titles, he murmured to the night. But I'll carry her name like a crown. He closed his eyes. Far away, in the quiet village of Obeek, Kioma stood under the moonlight, her fingers brushing the same pendant he had once left in her palm. And though they were miles apart, a single thought passed between them, like a whisper in the wind. We may not share a throne, but we share a soul. A full year had passed since Zikora wore the crown. Under his reign, Ogodoro changed. The courts opened their doors to farmers and artisans, not just chiefs and nobles. The village schools received books. He banned forced marriages. He established a hall for widows to learn crafts and trade, and he declared that no law would ever again be passed without the people's voice. The people called him the listening king. But still, the court whispered, why hasn't he chosen a queen? Why does he keep a chamber empty beside his? What of the girl from Obeek? No one dared speak her name near the throne, but every elder knew the truth. The king had left a part of his heart in a place no crown could touch. One evening, as a soft Harmattan breeze rolled through the palace windows, Zikora stood by the balcony overlooking the hills. His chief advisor approached. Your Majesty, the annual Unity Festival is in 3 days. Your people would rejoice to see you finally name a queen. Zikora smiled faintly. Let them rejoice for the right reasons. I'll name a queen when I find a woman whose love is louder than her ambition. The advisor bowed. As you wish, my king. That night, as the stars began to blink across the heavens, Obiajulu arrived at the palace gates, cloaked, weary, and carrying a sealed letter. Zikora welcomed him into the royal chamber with the warmth of a brother. Is she well? The king asked without hesitation. Obiajulu nodded. She lives in peace, runs a small herb school now. The village respects her. Zikora held the letter in his hands. He stared at the wax seal. She wrote this? Yes, Obiajulu said softly. Zikora waited until the room was silent, then broke the seal. Zikora, I don't know what title you wear now, but to me, you will always be the man who peeled yams badly and smiled like a boy. I have never stopped loving you, but I was born to heal, not to rule. If fate ever makes space for a woman with soil on her hands and truth in her voice, you know where to find me. Kioma. Zikora pressed the letter to his heart. That night, he wrote a decree. It was read across every province, every hill, every river bend. From this day, the Queen of Ogodoro shall not be chosen for beauty, lineage, or obedience, but for her ability to lead beside her king, speak boldly in truth, and carry the people in her heart. The people cheered. Some wept. And somewhere in Obeek, Kioma stood by her herb stall, listening to the town crier with tears sliding down her cheeks. She knew he hadn't chosen a queen. He had chosen her. Not in glittering gold or on a royal stool, but in the way he led, the way he ruled, and the way he remembered her voice when making every choice.